Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Farming Focus, the podcast for Southwest farmers, proudly brought to you by Cornish Mutual. I'm your host, Peter Green. Today we're talking about something that we generally strive for, but perhaps don't reflect on. That is the power of quality. Market prices for red meat have been pretty good recently, but as markets change and pressures grow, producing the very best isn't just a nice to have. For many smaller farms in particular, it's a way to survive and indeed to thrive. So in this episode, we'll be asking, is there always a market for quality? Does quality mean being at the very top of the butcher's classification grid, or is there more to it? What are the pros and cons of that EUROP classification grid? And are there alternatives? And how well placed are farmers in the Southwest to fill those niche and high value gaps in the market? Ultimately, we'll explore how smaller farms can take control of their future, focusing on quality over quantity and succeed in an increasingly competitive world. To help me unpack all of this, I am joined by two guests. We've got Phil Warren from Phillip Butchers in Launceston, a business with generations of experience sourcing and selling some of the finest meat in the country. And next to him, Matt Chatfield from the Cornwall Project, an initiative that helps to shine a national spotlight on Cornish produce and build connections between local suppliers and top restaurants. Phil, Matt, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hello.
Great to have you both. So, Phil, I'll start with you. Can you tell us about yourself and your business, please?
Well, we're traditional butchers. We're traditional farmers as well. I farm in Launceston. My daughter and her husband, they farm the farm at St Neot on Bodmin Moor. As a retail business, we sell approximately 150 cattle a week. I was very successful originally in helping out all my friends on Bodmin Moor and Dartmoor by trying to get rid of the cattle that the supermarkets did not want or downgraded. So my son had the bright idea of going to London first, and we've actually created quite a business in London. We turn over approximately 25 million a year now. With the help of Matt, who was in London, he opened up originally I think it was Cornwall in Your Kitchen, and now it's a Cornish Project. But I try to identify the chefs that actually do want something different. And I think the word is different rather than pinning it on one particular breed or type.
So, Matt, welcome to you. Can you introduce yourself and tell us about the route that's taken you sort of full circle to step into your family's kind of farming boots?
We've farmed the same land in Devon for about between 300 and 400 years. We always wanted to farm, but it was just too small to farm. It's like a 100-acre farm. And when my nan passed away, it was then split into 50-acre farm. I then decided, I was basically in London publishing at the time, but I decided that I wanted to come back and maybe farm one day. I've probably made two good choices in my life. I've made lots of bad decisions, but one decision was that I just realised that to try and make a farm work, I needed to create a market for really high quality meat. So I then approached Ian Warren, who's the son of Phil, with the idea of going to London to basically try and, build up a supply chain to London restaurants, and the view then to coming back and farm. Basically, it almost became a club of really top chefs, and we would bring them down here, we would go up there. So after 10 years, we built this really, really solid supply chain. So I then came back and farmed. But just before I did that, I spent like a year researching farm and visiting really good farmers, people I really respected. And I went on one trip to Extremadura in Spain, saw the Iberico pigs. I'd got a bit of a taste for ham-on when I was in London. I used to do markets and I used to have a ham-on supply next to me, and it's probably my only expensive taste really. But I went out and saw them, and I saw that to get really high quality animals, which I think Iberico, porkies and ham-on, you need an animal that's walked a long way in its life. So Iberico pigs, for about 18 months of their life, they live in very arid conditions. They walk miles, they get like muscle, their muscles get tense, but I think that's where you get flavour from. Then they put them in acorn fields and they literally double their weight in about 3 months on acorns. So I suddenly thought I need an animal that's walked a long way, fairly thin, and then maybe get them fat. And I just suddenly realised that sheep, there's no animal that's walked further really. And at that time, old sheep, mutton, have walked a long way, but people were getting rid of them just after they weaned lambs, and then they were selling them without aging. I just suddenly thought, maybe if I put fat on these animals, that might work. And I actually went, I don't know if Phil actually remembers, but before I did it, I actually went to Phil, and I think over the years, Phil's told me I've had terrible ideas, been very quick to say so, but it was the first time ever, and he was actually really positive. And he said, that's a very good idea. And one of the main reasons is sheep produce lanolin, which is waterproof. And that's where you get the tacky taste in, say, lamb and hogget. But after about 5 years, they produce less. And therefore, you're going to get an animal that basically you're not going to get, you're going to get a pure sheep flavour. So then I came back, called it a brand Co-Yule. My granddad, I grew up with ewes being called Yules. And because we're culling them, I called them Co-Yule. So it was all, homage to my granddad. And then I've basically farmed them for 7 years. And obviously, I now sell into that same supply chain we helped build up. And I have to say, without the aging the warrants do and the distribution and the selling, my sheep would be a poor product. But because we put 3 or 4 weeks dry aging on them, they actually become tender. I'm sending probably about 30 sheep a week to London, basically. So it's grown into quite business, really.
Brilliant. And that's a great summary. Thank you so much. What's really coming through loud and clear to me is that it's a story with partnerships all through it. When it comes to farming, Phil, I'll start with you. What does quality actually mean? What's the consumer looking for in a quality product? And is that different from what you would call a quality product?
Well, a quality product is, in my mind, something that pleases the palate, pleases a certain price point. We try and tell the chefs we work with, because we obviously got to do a premium back to the farmer, is that does 50p make that much difference to you if that person is walking out the restaurant with a 99% strike rate of eating quality? And we quickly realize there's chefs that get it and there's chefs that don't. And the ones that do, when they talk about quality is, and I've got a big problem with this with my farmer friends, because if you're farming and you need to pay your bills, that's slightly different than what that top restaurant actually wants. So eating quality, and I try and use this as a guide. I ask farmers to ask themselves, why is it that Dexter's, Jerseys, Irish Moiled, Highlands, why do they all, and Wagyu, why do they eat so well? And we really feel it's lack of muscle. So you've got the eye of the meat being smaller, less muscle on the backside, rounds. Now, the problem with that is they can come produce the finest eating meat, but unfortunately, they're 100 kilos light when it comes to paying. And farmers have got bills to pay. So I try not to get involved in what is quality. I get involved with what will eat best. And the strange thing is, most of my commercial farming friends, when I kill a bullock for them for their freezer, it's nearly always a small little heifer. It's not a big bullock. Now, this has been brought about over many years, really, because of, as you're going to go on later, about the EUROP grid. And of course, the farmers want to go to the shows and win the shows. And unfortunately, none of the bullocks that I would use here would win any show at all. And you have to separate that from profitability. I think a lot of people think because the bullock won the fat stock show that I judged, we would say this year I did it up at Bridgewater. The bullock I put first, I would not have in my shop.
Right. It's a different type of animal.
It's a different type of animal.
Again, we're coming on to this point that you spoke about at the beginning where, a supermarket buyer might want a certain type of animal. A show-winning animal might look very different, particularly on the rump and the back end, but what you're getting in the shop and I guess what you're placing with your chef customers in London is a different animal again?
It is lack of muscle. On a grid system, you see, we like an O, which is 3 levels down from the top. We want a fat bullock because if we're hanging it for London, most of the beef would be 50 days old, 60 days old. You've got to have the fat cover. I can't say we can sell this outside fat, but we can't hang it for that period of time without the fat cover. So why would a farmer want to keep a fat bullock for me and get penalised on the grid? That's why we regrade them when they come into our building.
Okay.
So we can pay them for the fat that the abattoirs penalise them on.
Yeah. So that fat cover on the hanging carcass gives protection so that
Yes.
despite the animal hanging for longer and potentially the muscle being exposed and deteriorating if it weren't covered with fat, because you've got a fat cover, it won't deteriorate to the same
It won't
extent.
deteriorate. And we can take a thin slice off that fat. Because of the system we put in a hanging system, which has actually come from America, that changes the air every 90 seconds. And it
Right.
pumps out bad bacteria. We keep the good bacteria because we want that to work, as in yogurt. And we'll say it costs us £1 million to put it in, to give you some idea. But we got a product now that can be 70, 80 days old that tastes as good as if it was 28 days old.
Wow.
And what we're doing is we're pumping out the water, basically. We're dropping about 6 to 7% from the time it arrives here to the time it goes out to the restaurant. And so we've got to explain to the chefs that we are actually light on our weight. That's why that difference in the price is there.
So you're getting a concentration of flavour, but the accountant in me is thinking, if I'm losing 6 to 7% of the weight, I've got to charge 6 to 7% more for
Well,
that per kilo?
Well, if you take 6 to 7% over 150 cattle a week, it comes to a lot of money.
Yeah.
We actually reward the farmer back because the EUROP grid system works against the production of high quality eating meat. Now, when my farming side, my son-in-law, he's always saying to me, I'm 100 kilos light. I have no argument about this. And can we get enough price into it to warrant that? No, we can't. But my God, we have a good go at it.
So, Matt, in your work with the Cornwall Project, presumably you have a lot of opening conversations with potential customers looking to supply them with fantastic West Country produce. What are the critical things that they're looking for? Phil talked there a little bit about eating quality, but what are they after? To what extent are they concerned about quality above all else, or is there a trade-off with being able to supply a consistent product in required quantities?
Actually, I suppose I'm fairly unique. When I approached Ian and Phil about delivering in London, I actually did the deliveries myself for about 7 years. At the beginning, it was a bit easier because there was, not so many customers and not so much weight involved. So for about 4 or 5 years, I would open the meat in front of the chef, and you just got a really good idea of what they were looking for. So to answer your question, all chefs are after actually different things. So I'm definitely not going to talk about beef today with Phil next to me. In terms of my sheep, what we've learned is all chefs want different things. I'll give you an example. So last night, a restaurant called Mountain, who's part of a Super 8 group in London. They've part of the group. They've got like 4 restaurants. We send them about 8 or 9 whole carcass a week. They're after an animal that weighs about 35 to 40 kilo dead weight with a decent fat cover. I've got another restaurant called Omar, which came number 6 last night in that National Restaurants Awards. These are all supplied by Phillip Butcher. I think 7 of the top 20 was supplied by Phillip Warren, by the way, last night, which is quite cool.
And we had number 2 and number 3.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Moorhole and Brett at Ledbury.
Yeah. So it's pretty,
Wow.
I thought I'd just drop that in. And then Omar, I've got another restaurant done very well. They want 40 kilo sheep with smaller fat cover. I think all sheep, because they've done this walking process, so my mutton are probably 7 or 8 years old. They've got the sort of flavour in the meat. And then I put a fat cover, which I hope, is all done on grass. And then it's aged by the Warrens in their £1 million facility. I don't know if you saw me laughing when that happened, but I'm very lucky to have that. It basically makes it unfair, really. People sort of ask, can anybody compete with you? And I'm like, it's fairly difficult because we've got this aging facility. So every chef wants different. So I think we assume the quality is there, but then it's making sure they get absolute consistency. So Super 8, they get 8 sheep a week. Some of the chop stand that goes into Mountain, into really, small sort of pieces of loin. They've got a restaurant called Kiln, which takes the leg and breaks them down into cubes and does a very famous curry or skewer. And then Omar have got different, uses. So quality is assumption there. The most important thing is they get a consistent product. So if I kill 30 sheep a week, I'm trying to kill some that I know are right for Super 8, some are right for Omar, some are right for a koi. A koi is an incredibly high-end restaurant. Mm-hmm. And I've also started selling to the Cornish food store. Obviously, Phillip Warren were in there first. They want a different size. So for me, quality is a bit of a given. Again, because of what the advantages I've got with the aging, I just need to make it consistent, and then they do the rest.
I'm going to ask a bit of a cheeky question now, and honestly, I'm asking it to try and play devil's advocate rather than to be rude, and I'm sure it'll be taken in that way. You've got this amazing facility, Phil, which sounds incredible, and I can well believe that gives you this unique selling point. Does that facility mean that you could take a good product and make it quality, or do you need good quality product going in to make sure you get that absolute top end coming out?
Yeah, you do need the top products going in, which is, like I said, we're looking for a very, very traditional product. We can improve it another way. Does it matter to we'll say a pub that is supplying a person they might see here or there, we'll say in Newquay or something like that? I don't think it does. But if you're going in the top end, like I said, to have all these restaurants in the top end, I just get annoyed actually with a lot of farmers. You can say the chefs don't understand what they're talking about. And I got to say, it's the chefs that have driven this. They do know what they're talking about. They don't accept near enough. And my old saying from all my life to my son has been, near enough ain't good enough. And that is the main principle that I've learned from the chefs as well. They do not accept it. If you were delivering into the Ledbury Notting Hill to Brett Graham, who's an amazing Australian chef, and he would take a pan of fillets and he would go through them, because we work a little bit with Lake District farmers. They have the same principles as us, and they would be the only other supplier in London that we would say we would trust to work with. They are amazing. And they would send in a tray of fillets, and Brett would go through them. I want this one, I want that one, and whatever. And that's the level you're working at. You're not working. We cut up bullocks here for different people, but it's not a thing we do anymore. But we've cut up, and I wouldn't have it in my shop. And I say to them, why? Why don't you do something better? If you're going to create a business for yourself, a box steam or whatever, you need to sell what you cannot buy in Tesco's. Now, I'm not running down Tesco's because they kill a lot of good cattle at St Mirren for Tesco's, really good cattle. But unfortunately, it loses control. When you see 21-day aged meat, it's 21-day aged, as you know, in a pack, whereas ours is 40 days aged in its carcass form. So it's a different product. And they're chefs, you can talk to your blue in the face. It's not for them because they've got margins to make, percentages to make, and they're feeding probably 300 people a day. The restaurants we're dealing with are feeding probably 60 high-end diners. Now, those diners, if you give them the 28-day wet-aged meat, they won't be going back paying their £200 for their meals.
And that was one thing that I was wondering, and you sort of touched on it there, is a lot of this around price point. So people going and getting mince from Tesco's are in a different market from some of the people that are going to the restaurants that you're supplying. Is that fair?
Well, with the whole carcass form, of course, our mince, and we mustn't go down this route, but our mince would be no dearer than going to a supermarket. It is the specific cuts. They're going to London. I mean, we have 7,000 or 8,000 customers a week in our shop in Launceston.
Wow.
Now, that's quite a business. Now, those people coming here, what I'm proud about is I've got most of the litter picker-uppers, the dustmen, I've got most of the doctors, I've got most of the lawyers, and I've got most of the accountants. And I come originally from a council flat, actually, and a lot of those people, my friends, are my customers. And that is the proudest thing I can possibly say about my life as a butcher.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
Phil, I'm looking at the ability of small farms to thrive in future at the moment. And one of my sort of provisional findings is that as well as having a handle on the basics of running a farm and the administration and being technically proficient, these farms have to be producing a quality product just to access the market. To what extent do you think that this will always be a necessity for the UK's farms? And how do you see the market playing out for small-scale farmers today in particular?
Well, small-scale farmers, obviously, there's a lot more self-selling. Unfortunately, you come back to the point I made, a lot of self-selling a product that actually is no better than somewhere else. They need to concentrate very much on what they're considered to be quality, eating quality. It must be what's on the plate. Now, you can get away so long with image. You can get away so long with fancy names. The latest thing, as you know, is regenerative farming. Well, traditional livestock farmers have always done regenerative farming.
Yep.
I did have a go at a certain dairy chap that I'm friendly with and said, I see you're using this as the latest hup. Those things I don't like because they're not saying, actual fact, we're going back to the way the small livestock farmers have been doing it for generations. And it's all these little things that they need to put together to be able to sell direct to the public. We don't mind them selling direct to the public. Where their problem will come is we do get them approached sometimes, our customers. What are they going to do when a restaurant turns around and say, I want 47-ounce sirloin steaks. I want them a inch thick. This is where they're caught. So they have to make their distinct marketplace. And one of the things was, what is quality? All I can bring it down to is what it's going to eat like. I know they need to really focus that that product is better or as good as anybody else's.
Matt, Phil's raised some really interesting points there, not least around how the market is separated, but also a little bit about sort of regen farming and some of the banners that are used. What are your thoughts on what he said there?
I mean, I'll talk a little bit about, say, the regen ag side of thing, which Phil has sort of brought up. I think when I first started, I did get a lot of influence, and it's just when regen ag was starting, and I got very much into it, and then I started talking to Phil about it and sort of took a lot of advice there. For me, I think the way I farm is letting grass grow and moving sheep daily, and then basically leaving as like pretty well like a half of grass cover and then carry on. So for me, I'm now actually working on the farm. I've got 100 acres that I'm leasing. They're putting 4 or 5 acres into herbal lay. I'm actually finding it really, really difficult, like, because it's trying to establish it and work it out.
Yeah.
So personally,
you're not alone, Matt.
So for me, I've farmed in various places now. For me, what I love is just seeing what's in a natural soil, what seeds are actually in the seed bank. I think for me, like, the seeds are in there. I mean, I've done this for 7 years. Obviously, for most farmers' experience, that's not very big. But I think with Regen Ag, I've worked with some people and they almost get a bit of a God complex where they think they're doing this incredible thing. And, for me, like, all I do is try and move sheep daily with electric fence. That's all I do. But the result of that after even a year, after 2 years, is just absolutely incredible. But the main thing is the water holding capacity of the soil, which that's the bit that's really shocking. I actually personally think that's the most important thing we should be doing, actually. But yeah, just watching the seeds slowly appear is incredible. I'm a bit like, I can't even drive. The other tractor I can drive is a Ford 3000. Anything a bit newer than that, I can't drive. And so I basically have to just farm without a tractor. And that, but I always find the less I spend, the less I need to make, which is my own personal thing.
That's brilliant. The less you spend, the less you need to make. And this is something which we hear again and again, particularly when we're thinking about carbon footprinting and inputs to the farm. Actually, we talked to Chris Clark in our Devon County debate about this. It's about looking at outputs from the farm in tandem with the inputs. You don't have to really nail everything back. It's about a balance.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
Phil, from the butcher's side, what do you look for in a farmer that you're wanting to sort of work with in the long term?
Obviously, I get her. It's looking at the stock, really. But you soon know, if you're a farmer yourself, those are giving you all the talk and not walking the walk. Most of the farmers I know love their ground and love their animals. And it upsets me at times when people say about, oh, farmers don't care. Farmers don't. They do. They really, really care. And I feel sometimes that gets a bit lost because everybody's looking for hooks. The hooks there. British farmers and British beef is some of the best in the world. And we need to keep talking about British farmers and British beef and British meat. It's very easy to have all these little things sidetracks, but we undersell ourselves, if I'm honest with you.
So talking about the story and how much we care. So Matt, coming to you, how important do you think that story is, especially when it comes to building relationships with chefs or restaurants? And what are they looking for?
Well, also, I originally went to London, was introducing Phillip and me to chefs, and they invariably then have to sell it to their customers. A story is absolutely and utterly vital for both, but it has to be true. You cannot be based on. So you need a story, but it has to be true. Two sort of examples. We're in Cornwall. Chefs are coming down here all the time on holiday, and we're getting phone calls saying, "Can I pop in and say, see what you're up to?" So at any time they could pop into the wiring shop, they could go into the cutting plant, they can come to my farm. So you just have to be absolutely honest in what you're doing. The other point is just a bit of a story. And so the reason in London, I sold fish. This fish is super high quality, and I was trying to sell meat. Chefs are just a lot more loyal to butchers than they are to fish. So it took us about 2 years before we started getting strong. And the reason it got strong was a chap called Tom Adams. He started a restaurant called PQ, and it was the first time London just went absolutely crazy with street food. He had like a street food place down on the embankment. He then turned it into a restaurant. He then asked to meet us. And where we got very good was a lot of chefs went abroad. Used to have the big sort of Marco Provites and those type of people, but there are a group of chefs, about 6 of them, that went and worked at Noma, worked around the world, really experienced native beef where they were. And when they all came out to London, they all started restaurants at the same time, including Tom. And they basically wanted to be able to meet the farmer, meet the butcher, and realise their animal was all native. And that we just hit it at the right time in the right place. So Tom Adams was the first one who came down. He was probably about 22 at the time, and he wanted to meet Phil, he wanted to meet Ian Warren, he wanted to meet the farmers, because everything was saying was true. It just worked. And it was just so that just showed what you need to do. What's quite interesting then is Tom Adams then came on that trip. He now actually lives and farms and has a restaurant about 3 miles from where we are. So he enjoyed it so much, he's now actually come here, and he sort of actually farms. It's now called Coosaid. It's a fantastic place. So that's quite a nice little story, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's making sure that there's truth in the story. It's really interesting what you say. I spoke to...
Also, during the break, Phillip did say, we actually have a quick break, but all that really matters really is what it is on the plate. So it has to taste fantastic.
So what are the biggest mistakes that farmers make when trying to sell their product direct to buyers? Phil, you touched on it in the main episode last week, but what do you think that people maybe, where do they fall short, and where could they improve?
To follow the line of absolute quality, if you see, years ago, I always remember I had a heifer come in. Well, if you kill a heifer that's come in bulling, when it dies dark and sticky, because obviously the pH has changed. And I said to the farmer, I said, "Well, you knew it was bulling. Why did you send it?" He said, "Well, he's coming up to 30 months. Although he ought to go." And I explained to him, "That's fine. For you, that's one heifer gone. For me, that's 150 to 200 customers that are going to be really cheesed off. But because obviously we burger it or do something else with it." And that is the principle. The farmers have to understand why they're doing it. They are doing it to produce something that the person buying it is going to really enjoy and eating. Not because they think it's the best product, not because of any other reason. It's got to be about the eating quality of that product. Whether they can make it pay is slightly different, because it's not easy, is it? The cost of slaughter now, and the hanging and whatever, and the lack of skills now through the trade. I mean, we're lucky. There's 100 and odd of us here. We train all our own. We've got 10 apprentices going at a time. We still use a 5-year apprenticeship, same as I had, indentured, and do everything properly. Well, of course, most people can't do that. We've been doing it for years. So it's not easy for them, but they can make their life better if the one thing they consider about at the end of the day, have the story, have the pictures, have whatever, but ensure that product is at its finest peak.
I'm interested to hear about the extent to which you can get feedback and work with customers to accommodate requests. We heard a little bit about it in the main episode, but actually, to what extent can you take the different requests on board?
You don't get too much feedback unless there's a problem. If I'm honest with you, I've always taught my son, the most important thing for me has always been with our retail business is customer numbers. You will soon know if things aren't right. That number just drops off. They'll come back around and whatever. But all the time we're looking at our customer numbers for retail. And like I said, dealing with the chefs, the biggest problem with a lot of the chefs is they got not employers, but perhaps the people in a group, because a lot of the restaurants in London are owned by groups. Are they allowed the freedom to do things? Because, they're being pulverized at the moment with national insurance, pulverized with all these rates and the rents in London. You would think they'd be coming back, and they're not. They're going up. They've got massive problems, and that's why I keep talking about the 50p. Irrespective of where the price point is, 50p makes a difference between. And this brings me in another thing. They want to sell a 6-ounce steak, whereas it used to be, say, an 8-ounce. And we agree with this. Eat less meat, eat it better. The thing is, they still want it the same thickness. So a lot of farmers don't get this, because I was a big seller of South Devon beef over the years, because obviously South Devon's had Guernsey within them, so it was a better eating quality product. They followed the EBBs, brilliant cattle, wonderful muscle, but we created a ribeye steak that nearly has to be sliced on a machine to get it thin enough to get it within the 6 ounces. People don't eat the 10-ounce steaks anymore. People had 10 or 7 to 8, and the restaurants are on 6. And we went on Radio Cornwall years ago, and I said we want people to eat less meat. And I think Lawrence, whatever he was called, nearly fell off his chair. The butcher was saying eat less meat, but it is the only way forward. We need to eat less meat and pay the same price. So we say to the chef, we want you to pay us for a 6-ounce steak the same as you used to pay us for an 8-ounce steak. We will pass part of that back to the farmer as a premium. Yeah. But that is the only way we can survive. And it's work. It's work.
Yeah. And so you're needing a smaller animal to make sure that
you need a longer animal. When the South Devons were 500 kilos dead, they were long. And you had long sirloins. What they've done is they created a more muscly, neater animal. I'm not knocking South Devons, honestly, because they're a wonderful breed. But they've got to understand, in their size issues, where does that leave the quality end of the market? It's not that the quality of the beef is wrong. It's the fact we cannot cut a 6-ounce steak.
Yeah.
And some of my best friends are South Devon farmers, and I hope they understand where I'm coming from, because they got an amazing breed. I mean, from a farmer's point of view, they can get a 400-kilo carcass at 21 months.
Yeah.
Well, that's a lot better than saying to somebody they got a carcass at 21 months. It's 279 kilos, isn't it?
Can I just come back to you on that piece around eating less meat? Because I think I understand what you're saying, but could you just sort of unpack why that might be the case for those of our listeners who maybe were wondering why you might say that?
Well, partly I think it fits the profile of what we're doing to nature, carbon and all things like that. But it's also a case of, I think, if you can do that, you can actually nearly make money again, so that you can get the same price for producing less, going back to the farmer. Okay. If they'll pay us for a 6-ounce instead of a 10-ounce or an 8-ounce or 9-ounce or whatever, that money can be passed back to the farmer, which somewhat equates between the big and small. It's a personal thing I've done for years. I've said it for 30 years. We do need to eat less meat, but eat it better. This pile hard. I don't know if you remember years ago, there was a sheep advert that the Meat and Livestock Commission did, was slamming the lamb. And it was just about chucking a bit of lamb in the oven or whatever. And I said, that was the biggest detriment to us. We're trying to promote lamb as a high quality product, because, it's hard to make money out of a carcass, because there's a lot of money for what you get. And of course, everybody wants the loin and not that. Very few people want the breast. But the good thing about Matt in London is he's actually got chefs buying the breast of lamb and using that as a premium product. If I went back 30 years ago and somebody was buying brisket, they were looked upon as the poor.
Yeah.
That they couldn't afford anything better.
Yeah.
The chefs have turned it around and made it look as a premium product. That's why the chefs have been good. They've been the best thing for the farmer ever, because they've taken the carcass, looked at it in a sensible way, and created premium products out of something that it was in the mince, it was in the pasties.
And it comes back to that story again, and this time it's the chefs who are taking it on. So finally, gents, what's one simple piece of advice that you would give to any farmer who wants to build stronger, maybe more personal relationships with their market?
Well, it feels like a cheap personally, really, because also I approached Phil 15 years ago, and that's sort of been the making of me, really. When I first started in London, the real first bit of advice, more on terms, we don't really mind who you supply, but then just make sure they pay on time. That was quite important. And when I first went to London, I did a special roast dinner. I got a chef called Alan Williams to cook a roast dinner, and Jack Stein turned up, which was I've never met Jack, son of Rick. Got on very well over a few drinks. Had quite a lively evening. I then got a phone call about a month later saying, "No, I'm coming back to Cornwall. We've actually we're doing a taste test. We've asked all the best butchers in the country to see if they want to supply to the Stein restaurants. Then by then, I think they were being supplied by someone up north. He said, I'm going to be passing warrants quite soon. Do you think there's any chance you can add to it?" So I phoned up him wrong. He just went to the shelf, picked up what was a normal bit of meat that we basically could guarantee, gave it to them. Didn't think much more of it. And then about 2 weeks later, Jack said, "You've actually won. We'd like you to supply us now." So what that was really important was when the restaurant opens, everyone, they get samples from everyone. Everyone sends in their very best. We've always sent what we can guarantee. Sometimes they'll launch with you, but other times they won't. But then quite often, about a month later, you'll get a phone call saying, we've actually been a bit let down. The quality's not quite good with the people we've got. Are you able to actually supply? So the lesson there is to always probably, deliver what you promise you can do. And I think that's
consistency.
a valuable lesson. Yeah. So don't give your best, just do what you can guarantee. So
Yeah, that's about the best. Like I said, don't sell anything to anybody that isn't right, which is very difficult for somebody who just killed one bullock and it isn't right. And that's why I honestly think you need to work with people that you can trust. People that, if they're going to give you a premium, you're going to get the premium. And that's what we've done with I've got a band of 120, 30 farmers, and I've trained them to start picking their own cattle because they were picking the wrong thing to start with. And if you find the right person to work with, yeah, there's a good future for it. I'm a brilliant butcher. I don't mind saying it myself. I think I'm a quite good farmer, but I'm not as good as my son-in-law, who's a Bodmin Moor farmer, brought up right through it. He's a better farmer than me. Now, just because you're a farmer doesn't make you the best person at understanding meat. And I've got butchers working for me for several years who still don't understand meat. They understand cutting up meat. They don't understand meat. It's a bit like me with the farming. Horses for courses.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
Looking ahead, how do you both see the balance between quality and quantity shifting perhaps in the next decade in British farming? Is it going to stay where it is, or do you think we could get more of a move one way or the other?
I'm just going to obviously talk about sheep. I think what Phil says is going to be, far more interesting. I've hit to a point where I obviously buy old sheep that are no longer fat for breeding, mutton, 7 or 8 years old. When I started, you could buy sheep that would kill out for about 40 kilo and cost you about £65. Now I think it's fair to say it's doubled to trebled. I think the Muslim market is becoming very big. They've got religious festivals. They're obviously getting a very good taste for high quality mutton. So personally, I can't even think about quality or quantity. I need to just go for a high end. That's going to be the only way I work. So I'm now investigating ideas to, I need to get consistency in a far better product. So restaurants are looking at it like they can really add value, and it really is, what it says it is. So I've been slightly good with the past, getting various sheep. Sometimes you get different breeds that don't quite work because the price has been relatively low. The restaurants have still been able to make money, but now it's getting to the point where I need to, if I'm going to continue settling on a breed, very consistent, this incredible quality. And, so that's, for me, my only chance in the future is absolutely utter quality and consistency, really.
Brilliant. So, Phil, final thought from you?
Well, I'd like to not take this as my business. A lot of young farmers especially say to me, what do they ought to be doing and producing and what's the future is? My stock answer to them is, we will never be able to produce ordinary beef at the same price as if it comes from Brazil, Uruguay, some of the African countries. We can't go there. We just cannot do it. So the only way that Britain can do it is by having a product that is actually better than average. We say all British beef is actually quite good for its different uses. And I would say that to get into our market is a very distinct market. I wouldn't advise too many people to go down that very distinct market, but all British beef should be a better eating product than they can stock buy from anywhere in Europe. There's a lot of New Zealand beef coming into this country at the minute, a lot of beef, and it's pasture raised, it's grass fed. It's there, and that is what they can compete with but they can do it better. They can produce a better product. Looking at my farm accounts and my butchery account, we've got to live. You've got to pay your bills. Whatever you do, you've got to pay your bills. And I think that farmers need to really concentrate on having that best product. The market will dictate. At the end of the day, it will dictate. But we cannot go down this commercial beef route on the same level field. It's just not going to work. And Britain's got a lot going for it. But they do need to understand, it's not one size fits all. Produce something that is grass-based diet. I think it's British beef is best. We want to make sure it is.
So we've got the climate for it. We've got the rain, the grass. We've got the breeds here. Let's make sure we're using the right types in those breeds to make
the Southwest has got this wonderful image. Don't care how good they like the image. Cornwall has got the image, and long may it last, but you don't get 3 chances.
Thanks very much. Gents, I've had a fantastic time speaking with you today. I'd like to thank you both, Matt Chatfield and Phil Warren, for contributing to such fantastic conversation. Thanks ever so much.
Cheers, Peter.
Cheers. Thank you.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
So it's time now for our showstoppers, where we try and pull out a handful of points from all of the conversation that we've had today. Firstly, I think it's really important that we think about the context of our farming system. We've heard this a number of times on the Farming Focus podcast, but Phil, I think it was, who talked about having the right animal in the right place. Not all farms will work with the same animal in the same system. That's a really important point to remember. Secondly, we touched on it at the very start of the podcast, and it sort of permeated through the whole conversation. We thought about partnerships quite a lot and the relationship between both parties. It's so important that there's trust between all parties. But last and most importantly, it's ultimately about a quality eating experience every time when we're talking about producing quality product. And as Phil rightly said, near enough ain't good enough. So making sure that we are on top of our game all the time is the absolutely most important thing.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
Well, that's all we have time for today, but join us next week for a bonus episode when we'll be looking at how to build stronger farmer-buyer relationships. We would love to hear from you with any feedback you have about the podcast, including questions or suggestions. So send us an email to podcast@cornishmutual.co.uk. Check out the show notes for more information on today's episode, including the link to our podcast disclaimer. You've been listening to Farming Focus, brought to you by Cornish Mutual. I've been Peter Green. Until next time, it's goodbye from me and everyone in the Cornish Mutual podcast team.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.